It's just because when I'm zooming, my computer just has a huge delay, and I have to cope with that, and it takes some time. So he's just warming up, not working.
No worries, we can.
Yeah, this is why I was. This happens sometime, and I just can't figure it out. Okay, so here we are. So my presentation will we'll present EDP in short. We'll set the scene and trying to explain how we see the world. I'll shortly describe a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about the roadmap, the Portuguese roadmap. So I'll put another hat just to let you understand how Portuguese people are, pushing and moving towards carbon neutrality. And then I'll give you some sum up of our strategy and goals in the short and the midterm and back to 2030. So who are we? We are an integrated utility. We are based in Lisbon, Portugal. And while considering EBITDA, we have around 65% of renewables based, 23% of networks, which are regulated businesses, and then 12% around client solutions and energy management. Through EDPR is our renewable company. So we are spread around the world, even in Asia, not presented in this map, but we have a strong presence in the US, in South America, and in Europe. Big presence in Portugal and Spain, but also around some other countries. And mostly we are talking about onshore, mostly onshore, but also offshore wind and solar. So who are we? We have generation assets, and we are talking about coal, gas, solar, and wind and hydro. We have strong hydro presence also in Portugal, Spain, and Brazil. We have a total 24 gigawatts of installed capacity, but 74% of which are already renewables. We have transmission lines in Brazil, and we have distribution networks in Portugal, Spain, and in Brazil as well. And then we have the supply side with more than 8 million customers, both electricity, some gas as well. We are around 12,000 employees. Just to give you, so we are a leading company, but not as big as some other utilities that you see. Our big commitments is to be a future-proof organization, keep on accelerating the sustainable growth on renewable energy, and maintain our excellency in ESG indexes and ratings, which we've been, well, honorably, we've been very well positioned in the last years. But how do we set the scene? Of course, that when we start looking at the world, we understand that we are not getting there. So we all know, I believe that all of us here in this conversation knows that we are not being able to halt climate change. Even with the COVID, I just looked for the NOAA data recently, and we can see that it's still going down. It flattened a little bit during this last year, but we can't move the curve. So this is very worrying, and it's a huge challenge, and we really want and believe we can be part of the solution. And it's interesting to see that as a sector, and Astrid made that clear as well, we were part of the problem. So 10 years ago, we were seen as part of the problem, and suddenly electricity is completely seen as part of the solution. And that's the role we want to play. We know that from the government perspective, we are not there yet. We don't have pledges that are able to achieve 1.5 degree scenario, but we know that society is all pushing to that direction. And what we've seen is that things are moving much faster than they used to be. And that's because there's a lot of sectors, all the society is moving and is pushing, and we see this coming. So how do we see? We see that electricity will play a very important role in this transition. because we need to have the renewables setting the scene. They need to be, well, almost 25% share in the electricity portfolio by 2050. This means that electricity demand will grow 3 times if produced and generated by renewables, because electricity will be an enabler for other sectors. So we see ourselves now as enablers. If you can electrify the world, you can then electrify sectors that has not been able to decarbonize. But electricity needs to be renewable. Sorry, again, the slide is trying to switch. I don't know why this happens. Apologize, I just don't know why this happens.
No worries.
Okay. And I'll bring 3 slides that's giving you 3 of our main trends that give us this clear path. Costs and demand. So we see from the renewable side that the forecasting, it's twice the gigawatts that has been addition. It's increasing really fast. But if you want to achieve the 1.5 scenario, it needs to grow much faster. And what we see as well is we already have a very mature competitive technologies, and we are talking about solar PV, onshore and offshore wind, as Ostred was mentioning. Even offshore wind is already competitive in several situations. And these costs, I think it's very important to underline, all scenarios in the past failed when they were talking about decreasing in the costs. You look to the EIA scenarios where they were planning and where they were setting some trends on declining costs, and you see how they fail continuously. Costs have came down. You don't see it in the slide, but in the past, costs came down much faster than what they envisaged. And so we believe that costs will continue to go down, and by 2030, you will see solar PV declining costs plus 35%, plus 20% decrease on onshore wind, and offshore can go down by 55%. Ostred will have probably a better figure than I do, but I think the figures were matching. So this is it's a very clear path for renewables. Nevertheless, we believe that we have to pay a special attention to grids. If we want a renewable world, grids need to play a very important role. We need to understand they are becoming more old, and they need to be renewal. We need to increase the service levels and resilience of the grids, digitalization with smarter grids, smart meters that will help business on the downscale, the downstream, and customers to become more aware, more powerful as a prosumer, to promote efficiency. So this is very important to take this in consideration. So important investments are required for networks as well. A lot of the renewable energy that now gets into the distribution grids. We were used to have a big power plants that were linked in the transmission lines, but solar, for example, and even wind, they are much smaller power plants. Wind farms are smaller sometimes, and around Europe that's very common. So they get in directly into the distribution grid. And again, another important role will be played by clients. So on the downscale, on the downside, downstreams, we will see decentralized solar playing a very important role, and new business models coming from that side, from the client need to energy demand, to better manage the energy that is produced in a decentralized manner. We see the e-mobility increasing really fast, and for this we need obviously big and good infrastructure, and again the services that come along with it will play an important role. as well pay attention to the intermittency that needs to and brings new business models to cope with that and manage flexibility. And then we also see that for businesses and for sectors that you are not able to electrify, green hydrogen will play a very important role and can play it also from the client side, not centralized, but in a decentralized way. So if you are able to produce, and you are, to produce hydrogen from renewable energy, then you start being able to decarbonize sectors that until today, you didn't see exactly how you would be doing that. And I'm talking about some industries like chemicals and stuff like that, and some transport modes that are not able to become electrified in the short term. We are also seeing that finally, looking at the Paris Agreement, we see good news. We see Europe being ambitious already. We see the Biden administration coming back to the Paris Agreement. So I believe that they will be playing a very important and inspiring role for all the world. And we see even China saying that they will become carbon neutral before 2060, which I think is very good news. And we also see the young people that Ostra also highlighted, young people saying that we need to make this change, so society will continue to push for it. And again, as a company, we believe that we can be part of this solution. From the financial side, we see that there's a lot of tools that are trying to switch the finance investments to a sustainable investment. And two important tools that are coming as important tools are green bonds that are growing very fast, and 33% of issuances are already made by corporates. And we can see some evidence on pricing advantages on issuing these green bonds instead of non-green issuances. And we also see EU taxonomy as a key tool to implement the EU Green Deal and aiming to become a global standard. So it will help to move the investment to a sustainable investment, which is good for this common goal of decarbonization. And now just coming to what Portugal did, and I'm highlighting that because I think it's a very good example. So the Portuguese government published in 2019, but well, the discussions were around 2018, its roadmap for carbon neutrality. And what we see, well, Portugal has been increasing its CO2 emissions until 2005. And after that, the CO2 emissions are already declining sustainably. What the roadmap says and envisages is a clear path towards neutrality, where the energy, well, when I say we, now I'm talking as a citizen, a Portuguese citizen. So the Portuguese government wants to reduce 90% of CO2 emissions by 2050, but the energy industry, the energy sector will play a bigger role. So it will be decarbonized by 96%. We see that the transports after 2030 will play an important role as well. And so what are they envisaging? So again, published in 2019, their expectations was that during this decade and before 2030, Portugal would be able to phase out coal. They would increase solar fast enough, because their expectations were that they would be able to have the installed capacity of solar aligned with wind. Portugal has a lot of wind capacity already. They were seeing that after on the decades ahead and until 2040, that green hydrogen would start to be a reality. that the battery storage will become more competitive. So Portugal has a lot of hydro, and with hydro we have pumping, and pumping is a very, very effective way of storing electricity. So we already have that. But if you are thinking about on the downstream, on the client perspective, storage and batteries are still, well, not as mature as we would like to, but they will come. In this roadmap, they were expected to become more cost effective during this decade, but then scaling up only in the next decade. And well, until 2050, we would get there. Portugal also has already an offshore wind. It's a floating wind farm. It's from Wind Atlantic, which is belongs to Ocean Winds, which is a joint venture between EDP and Engie to deploy offshore. And this floating offshore is very interesting. I believe that this floating offshore turbines and designs will play a very important role as well, because it opens the market of offshore. And what had happened? 2 years after this roadmap being published, suddenly the map, the Portuguese roadmap, just shrinks, and phase out coal comes 10 years ahead of what they envisaged just 2 years ago, which is interesting to see how a lot of variables are, and you do not control them. And suddenly, what happened? What happened was a mix of several things that happened at the same time. The natural gas prices came down, and the tax on coal in Portuguese came up. So there was an inversion in the order of merit, meaning that the baseline, when you're producing electricity, the baseline in Portugal used to be coal and suddenly started to be gas. And CO2 prices also came up. And because of these three configurations, companies decided that they would just decommissioning earlier than what it was expected. So in 2 years' time, and instead of a decade, Portugal will be out of coal during this year. So you see how it moved. And on the other hand, it's interesting to see on the solar side that by 2020, we already had doubled the installed capacity of solar. And the government auction that were done last year came with the lowest worldwide price. So if you remember what Austria was seeing around 2012, the solar prices was 104 euros per megawatt hour. And these contracts, the auctions that were, they had a price, the shortest and the lowest one was 11.14 euros per megawatt. So you see how costs came down so fast. And Portugal has already plus 2.2 gigawatts in the national pipeline to be deployed in the next years. So we believe that these things will come quicker than expected. We are seeing this coming. And so our strategy, and to end this, we've just published and announced our business plan for 2025. And what we've decided as a company, worldwide company, is that we will be coal-free by 2025, and we will be carbon neutral by 2030. By 2030, we believe that, well, in Portugal, that we've been stocking until now, the gas power plants will probably be working as well, but they will be working more as a backup capacity. So we will continue to increase on the renewables, and we aim to have an additional 50 gigawatts of renewables in our portfolio. We will be producing 100% of renewable generation, and we will be carbon neutral by then. And how we'll get there? So again, as I mentioned, so we are phasing out coal in Portugal and Spain during this year and the next year as well. And so this is the CO2 emission, specific emissions that is coming down. By 2025 will be coal free. We will reduce our equity in the coal power plant that we'll have in Brazil, and by 2030 we will be 100% renewable. And just to give you a clue of what this means that as a company, and comparing with the Science-Based Target Initiative that aligns the ambitious targets of companies with what science is asking for, what we see is a curve that is below the science-based target 1.5 pathway. So we've been recognized by science-based targets with the previous ambitious targets that we had. And now we are just asking them to review these targets as we just decided that we would become CO2 neutral, meaning that we will reduce more than 98% of our CO2 emissions by then. And this is what I have for you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm glad to try and reply to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara.